Welcome to the Unite Developer session on checkout extensions. My name is John Arthorn, and I'm an engineering manager working on checkout extensibility at Shopify. Earlier today on the Unite main stage, you heard about some new capabilities coming to Shopify Checkout that allow developers to customize and extend the checkout experience using apps for the first time. I'm going to spend about 15 minutes giving you a deeper look at these new features, and then we'll have a panel of experts ready to answer your questions during a Q&A on Discord. During the main stage presentation, Manuel introduced the idea of extending checkout through apps and gave you a sense of what capabilities this brings. What I want to dig into during this session is two things: why we're building checkout extensions and how they work. I want to talk you through some of the problems we're trying to solve with checkout extensions and how the technologies we built aim to solve these problems. As you listen, please take a note of anything you'd like to hear more details on, and we'll meet up on Discord afterwards to answer your questions. To lay the groundwork, I'd like to start by summarizing what's available today for customizing checkout and some of the problems merchants are faced in using them. Most stores have fairly limited ability to customize the checkout experience. They can make simple visual changes using the shop theme and have some options to customize a few parts of the checkout workflow, but that's about it. Plus, merchants are able to do more complex customizations through the Checkout Liquid template. Liquid templates are a powerful tool, and they let you do all kinds of customizations. But this is a sharp tool that comes with significant problems and risks. I'd like to quickly walk you through what we've been hearing from merchants about problems using Checkout Liquid for customizing their checkout. The first problem merchants face using Checkout Liquid comes from the tight coupling to the implementation of checkout. When you inject scripts and CSS through Liquid, they often end up with dependencies to the DOM and style classes of the base checkout page. This makes it hard to evolve the implementation of checkout without breaking merchants' customizations. This puts us in a lose-lose situation. If we keep checkout stable, merchants miss out on new checkout features. If we change it, merchants are forced through a painful upgrade process. In some cases, like with Shop Pay, we worked around this by providing a new buyer experience that doesn't integrate with Checkout Liquid. This gives buyers a great purchase experience, but with the trade-off that merchants don't get to customize it. One of our design goals with checkout extensions was to escape from this level of tight coupling and brittleness. The second major problem is the workflow for developing and integrating changes. This especially comes up when a merchant's trying to integrate code from a third-party software vendor. Merchants receive Liquid snippets from developers, and they have to merge and integrate them into a single Liquid file. The risk of bugs and regressions is high every time they touch it. When a new checkout version comes along, they have to repeat the whole process all over again. This whole workflow is really painful for merchants. Security is another thing we worry about a lot. As a merchant, it's great to be able to insert your own arbitrary JavaScript into your shop, but this creates a big security risk, especially during checkout. There's sensitive personal information, addresses, and even credit card information being entered on these pages. Malicious JavaScript code can access all of this. We really need to move away from third-party JavaScript running on the checkout page to keep it secure. Now that I've given you a feel for some of the problems we're trying to solve, let's take a look at the checkout extension system we're building. As I go, I'll touch on how we're aiming to solve some of these drawbacks. Our new customizable checkout has three central concepts. First, extensions. Extensions allow an app developer to contribute functionality to a particular part of the checkout page. Second, UI components. These provide a way to add rich visual elements to checkout. And third, a branding API, which allows merchants to customize the appearance of the checkout page along with all of its extensions. I'll go through each of these areas, but first I want to touch on some aspects of the system architecture that may not be obvious if I dive straight into the details. One of the key characteristics of the new approach to checkout extensions is that it's much more focused on the browser client side. Currently, much of the functionality driving checkout happens on the server, and the major services you interact with as a developer are on the server side. Liquid templates are rendered on the server, and apps interact with Shopify Checkout through GraphQL and REST APIs. Data is passed back to your application via webhooks. All of this happens through server-to-server interactions before or during page rendering. Checkout extensions, on the other hand, are focused on the client side. As an app developer, you're extending a client-side application directly rather than integrating with the backend. This is an important conceptual shift to understand. One of the major wins from this new architecture is speed. Buyer interactions can happen with few or no server round trips, making for a really great buyer experience. Perceived buyer performance is really valuable for merchants. It improves both conversion rates and customer trust and satisfaction. As developers, you'll be able to build much more dynamic and interactive customizations for merchants with checkout extensions. Every aspect of our checkout extension architecture is built for speed. This means lightweight sandboxes to run extensions, tiny libraries, and common UI components, all rendered from a single host page. While the developer integration points are on the client side, checkout extensions will be hosted by Shopify at runtime. This means that we take care of the heavy lifting of resiliency and global scalability for you. With that in mind, let's go through the major checkout customization concepts I introduced earlier, starting with the first one, extensions. Extensions are created by third-party developers like you to customize the purchase experience for a merchant. They connect to Shopify-defined places in the overall checkout flow called extension points. This mockup shows some example extension points that will be available to checkout extensions. They come in 3 different varieties. Extension points that augment an existing part of the checkout experience, for example, after the header, after the shipping method, etc. Extension points that replace an element of the checkout page, for example, completely replacing the breadcrumb navigation element below the page header. Finally, we have extension points that add entirely new elements to the checkout flow, for example, a post-purchase page. Having these carefully defined extension points makes it easier for a merchant to combine multiple extensions with less integration pain, and makes extensions more stable as the checkout experience evolves. This gets us away from the painful checkout upgrade cycle that advanced merchants have to deal with today. Because extension points are defined at a conceptual level rather than tightly coupled to the implementation of the page, they'll be adaptable to different checkout experiences. If you enable Shop Pay on your shop, for example, these same extensions will just work without needing more effort from either the merchant or the app developer. So to recap, we have various places in the checkout flow that you as an app developer can plug in your functionality. Since these extensions are plugged in on the client side, they're written in JavaScript. You can either use a declarative React component coding style or plain JavaScript to build your extension. The example you see here adds a text box for a buyer to add a custom GIF node on their order. Now, here comes the trick. How can we allow this JavaScript code to execute safely within checkout without adding the security risks I talked about earlier? The traditional solution to this problem is to use iframes, which allow you to embed one web page directly into another. This is fairly safe because browsers enforce security constraints that prevent iframes from reaching into the host page. This is often referred to as the sandbox. There's a downside though. I'm sure you've all experienced the clunky feel of iframe-powered websites. Each frame is really a separate website and it shows. They load separately and tend to have different styles and components. The interaction and flow of data between elements of each frame is not great. We knew this wouldn't be good enough for the kind of checkout experiences our merchants wanted to build. We needed something with the security guarantees of iframes, but with the feel of a fully integrated web app. So that's what we built. The details are really interesting, so I'll dive a little deeper into how this works. Modern browsers have a powerful feature called web workers. They run as a separate background thread as part of a web application. Each worker loads with its own origin and security context, the so-called sandbox. This means that a worker can load and execute an extensions code from another domain. The worker does not have direct access to the DOM of the main page, and is instead given a basic set of its own globals to work with. With checkout extensions, your extension code is packaged along with some framework code, all running inside one of these web workers. This framework code takes care of loading and executing your extension at the right time, and passing data back and forth between endpoints in the extension and the main page over a secure message channel. When your extension asks to render a text box, for example, a description of that component is serialized and sent to the main page, where they're rendered as native HTML components on the host page. This lets you build a checkout experience that's tightly integrated with the main checkout page, while keeping the checkout domain secure against malicious scripts, which can only ever execute in a sandboxed worker thread. We may actually still use iframes as part of our sandbox implementation, but the important distinction here is that all the visual elements, both the default checkout elements and your extensions, they're all rendered together in the main host page, even though the scripts are executed in a background worker thread. This sounds pretty neat, but what can you actually do with extensions? Let's walk through some of the APIs that are available. The APIs that will be available to extensions are flexible enough to enable a wide variety of checkout customization workflows. Here's some examples of the kind of things that checkout extensions will be able to do. Through the Line Items API, your extension can access line items in the current checkout as well as update them or add new ones. Similarly, you can access customer information and both read and modify shipping and billing addresses. For more advanced applications, you can also access and update custom meta fields stored on the product, variant, or shop. You can also add meta fields to the order that will be produced when the checkout completes. You can also access information about the buyer journey. This tells you what page of the checkout they're on and lets you intercept and block progress between pages. Think, for example, of an age verification check or a safety warning, where you want the buyer to acknowledge it before proceeding. Finally, you can access attributes defined in the cart that was used to start the checkout. Since the cart page lets you do more complex customizations, including custom liquid templates, this means you can put a more complex customization on the cart page, and then pass the result of that into the checkout through cart attributes. When you put all these APIs together, you can build quite powerful customizations. Here's an example that looks for a particular product in the checkout's line items. If it's not there, a button is added to the page, allowing the buyer to add it. When the button is pressed, the line item API is used to add this item to the checkout. This is a great way to add a free gift or sample to the buyer's order. Notice that the extension in this example is able to use custom business logic to decide what to display, and also execute custom logic based on the buyer's actions during checkout. And because this is using APIs designed for extensions, they won't break built-in checkout behavior or be subject to the checkout upgrade cycle, like today's liquid-based checkout extensions. Let's move on to the second major element of the Checkout Extensibility Toolkit, UI components. Checkout extensions have access to a rich library of visual components that they can use to build interactive checkout functionality. You'll find most of the usual UI components that are available through HTML or JavaScript libraries such as React. You can see on this slide a selection of these components, which will give you a sense of what kind of visual customizations will be possible with extensions. A key advantage here is that the exact same component library powers the default Shopify checkout experience. This means that components provided by apps integrate seamlessly into the buyer's checkout experience and have the same snappy performance. Customizations using the branding API, which I'll talk about last, are applied on these components automatically. You have a choice of using either a plain JavaScript programming style or the declarative React style. Here's an example that adds an extra text field in a plain JavaScript style. Here's the same example using a React component syntax. The choice is up to you, and the features available to your extension are the same either way. You may find the React style easier to work with if you're building more complex nested elements, but you can use whichever you're most comfortable with. Finally, let's take a quick look at the third piece of the Checkout Extensibility Toolkit, the new Checkout Branding API. If you built custom checkout experiences in the past, you're likely aware that the Shopify admin lets merchants make basic changes to the checkout page, including background colors and images, fonts, and logos. Those customizations will still work with checkout extensions, but you need more advanced control to replace the kind of things that were possible with checkout liquid templates. The new Checkout Branding API will give merchants much more fine-grained control of the visual style of the page. This API is still under development, but you can think of it as the checkout extensions answer to CSS. One of the nice powers this brings for merchants is they can customize the appearance of the default checkout components as well as the third-party extensions at the same time. And they can do it without reaching in and overriding CSS styles from the Shopify checkout implementation. This means customizations won't get broken as the underlying checkout implementation evolves. Again, our goal here is to give you a higher abstraction level that decouples your customizations from the implementation of checkout. This gives merchants a higher level of stability and lets us continue evolving the Shopify checkout features more quickly. In this example, we can see the default checkout experience on the left, alongside a checkout that's been customized using the branding API on the right. You can see here that the fonts and colors are different and the corners have been made more square. A checkout extension offering a free sample has been applied with the same branding as the rest of the page. Expect to hear more about the checkout branding API in the year ahead. So I hope this quick overview gave you an idea of what problems we're trying to solve with checkout extensions, a bit of detail of how they work, and the new powers they bring for app developers. We're really excited to see what you build with it. We'd also love your feedback as we continue to evolve this platform. What's missing from the extension, component, and branding APIs? What's the developer experience like? What else would you like to know about how checkout extensions work? Please join us in the Discord channel for our Q&A as we dive into some of these questions. We've got a bunch of folks from Shopify in the channel and we're ready to jump into the conversation. Thanks for listening, and I look forward to chatting with you on Discord.